Hey everyone, we're back. In case you missed it, Tim and I last time took a little stroll down the walk of offensive security and kind of the shift towards proactive security and testing, just evolution of the field in general. You can always go back and watch that on our website. On that topic today, very similar, but we're going to talk a little bit more about just actually validating and prioritizing the critical risks, scoring frameworks, and just kind of like digging into the next level of detail. The things that you need to be on the lookout for, as well as we see this ASM market continue to mature, and how to embed it in your security program. Tim, this is our second one, so basically we're professional podcasters at this point. It's two in a row. It's not quite a trend yet, but if the cyber thing doesn't work out, we know we've got a home here. But anyway, thanks for joining me again, Tim. Looking forward to the conversation today. And by the way, for the audience, we want to make this interactive. So please, as you have questions and thoughts, please throw them in the chat. But ready to go, Tim? Should we roll?
Yeah, professional podcasters. Here we go. All right. So let's start off with, so Aaron, we've been doing this a long time. What does attack surface management and specifically proactive attack surface management mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, we covered this a little bit last time, talking about this shift in terminology, if nothing else, from kind of offensive security to a more positive term, proactive security. And then, is it a marketing term? What does it really mean? And we dug into this a little bit, but it is more than a marketing term and really means a lot of things. And as I talk to folks in the industry, I hear often that the piece that's needed, and as we think about proactive security, first of all, it has to be continuous. I mean, we hear over and over, like, look, I mean, the results of the test are only as good as the last test that occurred, and the time that transpires after it just really puts you at risk. So there's got to be some continuous nature. I mean, always on. Of course, there's some lapse in time, but just always looking and always continuous and on top of that, ever evolving attack surface. I think from a proactive perspective, it allows the enterprise security teams to be more informed. I mean, the number of stories we've heard where, a customer was informed of assets they have in a way that they shouldn't have been, either, a third party, obviously, breach, maybe shadow IT and other things, but things that they would like to be on top of in proactively finding themselves, they're finding out through other parties. And that's not a lot of fun. Nobody likes surprises in the IT estate. And then just noise reduction. I mean, we're seeing this shift where, back in the day, like early on when we were doing this, I mean, the standard pen tester was kind of just doing vulnerability scans, tons of noise, tons of false positives. And the expectation now is much higher than that. There's got to be some level of validation, not only of false positives, but also that vulnerabilities, which are found, actually could be impactful and exploited. There's a ton of vulnerabilities that just really are not impactful, and the IT security teams don't need to worry about. But how would you define it? How do you think about it?
I mean, definitely vulnerability scanning is a component of it. That's for sure. But it's, at the end of the day, it's knowing what you've got and knowing how to handle it and being ready. It's a fluid environment. Your attack surface, like even between, if you're just doing vulnerability scans, not even thinking penetration tests, if you're doing vulnerability scans, there's a chance that something is going to pop up between scans. And you have to be able to know, like, how am I even looking beyond that scope? Probably not. Your vulnerability scanner's probably got a static scope defined, and it runs every Thursday or once a month or whatever the interval is. And like, what you get is what you get. So, but the bigger thing is really like what you're hitting on there is the triage and the validation. People are starting to realize that it takes FTEs. I have to have full-time employees on my team just to go through all this stuff and triage it, understand which is real, what's just hype, what's a false positive, right? And also, are there false negatives? Like, that's another thing you need to worry about. And that's why people are starting to ask the question: should my people be doing this, or is this something that I can leverage an expert that really knows this specific thing better themselves, right? Would you rather have your people chasing? These are really what I would call tactical things. Vulnerabilities on the outside are kind of common. A lot of companies share the same types of vulnerabilities. So if it's common like that, shouldn't you have isn't this a good place to kind of centralize that service or that mindset or that mind share, and let them do it, and let your people instead focus on things that are kind of more strategic to your company? Because I'm not going to know inside of your company, But as somebody who's got a background in this, I can understand the stuff that's in your attack surface pretty easily. And you need to understand, like, how does that impact on the inside?
Yeah, it's a standard thing about ensuring that members of that team that know their business better than anyone else or any third-party consultancy ever could can stay focused on enabling their business, in not wasting time in other areas, but they knowing their business, prioritizing vulnerabilities, and driving remediation.
Yeah, 100%. So in the time that we've spent, in the last 2 decades plus, what about the approach has actually changed? What do you remember about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you think back early on, if you think about kind of the early, it wasn't even called attack surface management then, but it was kind of like, you're looking for low hanging fruit. And in many cases, you're kind of defining what that provider would look for, and almost always just kind of like your external attack footprint. But you're telling them what to look for. I mean, the reality is, like, if you're already telling them, what to scan and watch and monitor, kind of already going to be missing things. So now I think it's about watching anything and monitoring anything that could just be tied to your organization. So not really starting with like a network block or a domain or anything else, but what's your organization and what could be out there. So we're obviously, I think it's evolved to a state where, you need to be very concerned about and need help finding what you don't know is a really important piece. And then, there's clearly a shift towards, it's one thing to just identify the attack surface. It's another to start shifting into what parts of that attack surface are actually vulnerable. And, then more importantly, I mean, just obviously the breakdown of the traditional perimeter and the fact that, your assets are just about anywhere, whether it's internal, external, cloud, and so there is really no more well-defined perimeter, and we have to be looking everywhere for what our customers don't know.
Yeah, 100%. I remember back in the day, the easiest way to do this was just to fire up Nmap, and you use Nmap and you go scan the network. And then I remember it was also very controversial. Is this hacking? Am I hacking because I'm scanning something with Nmap? Just checking to see if a port is open. It doesn't even indicate.
And sometimes enough to take down a system, right?
Yeah. Like, I've definitely got stories about that. Like, you give it so many TCP connections, then it says, okay, I'm done. I'll turn it off now.
Going to sleep.
Yeah, 100%. But it was even before that, though. Like, if you think about you brought up cloud. So think about the history of that. Once upon a time, if you had stuff on the internet, it was in your building. You had a server room, whether it was just a closet or whether it was a full-blown data center with raised floor, didn't matter. You had a place in your building where you had racks, and you had 1U, 2U, 4U, whatever amount servers. And those numbers probably don't mean anything to people born in the last 5 years, right? But are coming in their career in the last 5 years. But we had these things sitting in there, and if you want to know what your attack surface was, you could trace the cable. You could literally go to here's my WAN connection from the telco. I can see it goes into this router, and then it goes into the switch, and I could go trace all these things down. Oh, these things are plugged in. Let's go figure out unplug. Attack surface reduced right there. And then it got a little harder because everyone said, hey, you know what? It's kind of expensive to run all this with the cooling and the backup utilities. We're not really good at it. We're a blah, blah, blah business. Like, this is not for us. Let's go use Rackspace or a colo. And you could still kind of do this. You could go visit and trace the cables and unplug. Or you could ask the colo engineers to go do the same thing, right? And then now we've got cloud, and now it's even more difficult because people can have multiple tenants and they don't even realize how many tenants they have, let alone which cloud providers they're in. And then you start introducing shadow IT. The marketing guy went and bought some SaaS service, and now it's part of your attack surface, and you had no idea. And then fast forward to a couple of years ago, we got COVID, and now everybody and their brother's home and network is now part of your attack surface because they're working from home, and your laptop that had protections on it that were like not hardened for living out in the exterior. It was designed for living in an enterprise network. They're now sitting there at home, and who knows, that random device that's been compromised in your employee's home network might be attacking it now.
It's like we were talking about as we were preparing, and I mentioned the incident response project that I worked on, probably 15, 20 years ago, where, we literally went on site and ended up with very low technology Post-it notes to inventory the machines and console into those machines and determine what was running on them. And I don't know, I'm not sure if that world was more complex or less, but the attack surface has definitely shifted for sure. Yeah, exactly. Tracing cables and everything else. But, we think a lot, shifting gears a little bit. I mean, we think a lot about, so there's been a ton of advancement in the technology around ASM and all these other pieces. And I think in some cases that's phenomenal. In other cases, I think as an industry, we put too much emphasis on the importance of technology. And one of the things that, as an organization, we've stayed true to is just the criticality of human intelligence as part of this process, kind of like technology enabled and using the best of technology to make our teams and our experts as effective as possible. So kind of like tech enabled, human delivered is just a core part of our thesis. And we think about, we see customers that just engage from a technology perspective, and we think a lot about what they may be missing. And, we hear often there's an overwhelming number of findings, just a lot of noise, which we talked about before. As we've seen in the last 18 months, I mean, when the economy starts to shift a little and slow down a little, IT security teams and finance teams are just very focused on ensuring the efficacy of what you have. It's like no more new technology. We are overloaded with technology. We need to make the most of what we have and make it effective and useful. So, and then there's, of course, just the pure human-driven approach, which is leads to an overwhelming amount of data to process. And so again, the answer is in the middle somewhere. And, it's again, a large part of our thesis and how we work to bring technology to bear to make teams more effective. But I shouldn't say that. I mean, we're a long ways from pure technology being as effective as the combination of people and technology. What are your thoughts there? Like, what are you seeing in that space, Tim?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we've got examples of this, right? A recent example with one of our customers inside of attack surface management, we found Tomcat default credentials for their admin console. Now that's as old of a vulnerability. It's been around, like Nessus could probably find that 10 years ago, maybe longer ago. But your standard attack surface management kind of approach would be, hey, I can see this. I can authenticate using a script, basically an automation that says admin credentials, boom, I'm logged in, I got a successful response. Our side takes it much further, is we bring that attacker mindset, that hacker pen tester mindset, and we actually go log into the thing and say, okay, what's here? Like, how important is this asset? Oh, look at that. Here's a bunch of environment variables for this Tomcat instance. One of those is an Amazon credential. Let's go log into AWS. Sure enough, it's a valid credential. By the way, that was a good deception opportunity right there, but they missed it. It could have been fake creds that set off a signal. It didn't. Now, second thing, okay, now I'm in here. What resources are in this AWS tenant? Is this just a throwaway tenant? Is it an isolated tenant just for this silly little application that's sitting on the web, or is it part of the larger enterprise? Turns out it had a lot of stuff in it. Enumerated all those resources, found a S3 bucket. S3 bucket had 100,000 records of PII in it. That's breach worthy right there. And it's one of the simplistic kinds of breach, like the most simple breaches you can get. It's very, very hard to detect things like that because you're just popping a vulnerability on the outside, which the vulnerability is just default creds. So it's not like you've got an opportunity for a signature on that. Like, that's not there. And there's almost no detection is going to see somebody just logging into AWS and enumerating a bucket, and then you're done, right? That's so hard to do. So we were able to go find that and show a customer, hey, this is a very, very severe thing. So, and all the noise you've got where everything is a critical, everything is a high, and so therefore nothing is critical or nothing is high. Here is one that we can actually tie back to what would have been an actual breach for you. So that was a really cool one that showed like that mix where you have to have that human side, that attacker mindset present with it. Another one that we had recently, which was really just shows how this is much more than just vulnerability management. Like, this actually plays both, I would call left of boom as well as right of boom. So before bad and after bad. There was a Cisco bug in one of their appliances. This is about 2 months ago. Basically, the story goes, a customer found that they were breached, and they were doing forensics and found that there was a zero-day vulnerability exploited in Cisco in this appliance. So Cisco said, okay, we're going to make a CVE for it, and became a critical thing. Everyone started looking for it. Oh, and by the way, since it's being attacked by this particular threat actor, they're leaving web shells in this thing. So we now have not only the ability to signature this vulnerability, but the presence of the bad guy, right? And so we go and look at all of our customers who's got this asset, this type of device. How many of these customers still have it online? Okay, boom, next check. How many people are vulnerable? Okay, next check. How many of them have the web shell? Ooh, we got a hit. So which means now we've got a customer who's in the middle of a live incident scenario. This is not just your traditional pen test or vulnerability. Like, nope, there's an actual bad guy has touched your device without authorization. And given the timeline of this, like, man, the Cisco released this thing like a week, like in the last week or whatever, but we know the breach was probably going a week or 2 or 3. How long was it going before it got to Cisco's attention? So you got to think, man, this threat actor might have been in your environment for as long as a month. This is a big deal. You need to go break glass, invoke your incident response procedures, isolate this thing, figure this all out, and see if there's not an additional means of access now for this bad guy. It was a big deal. So like those are good, both examples where you can't just use the tech only. You got to have that human ingenuity. And as much as LLMs and Gen AI have really helped drive things, they're not replacing that anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the full spectrum of kind of exposure risk, right? And we talk so often with our customers about the struggles that we have as an industry, just determining risk and figuring out risk. This is one I'd love to hear, from the audience on as well. We think it's one of the toughest things to do, and we've been talking about this for the 20 plus years that we've both been in the industry, and I think there's some strides being taken and some things being done to simplify the process of identifying risk of assets and figuring out what to address. But what kind of frameworks or just kind of like structures, Tim, do you think about when it comes to determining risk scoring and working through that process?
Well, it's a hard one, right? So everybody's got like their favorite scoring system, or they've got CVSS, and we've got companies out that just try to assign scores to you as like it's a credit score or something like that. But it's a lot of times they're closed off, they're not very transparent, and how that factors in is difficult to understand. I'm a real big fan of, can you exploit it? Yes or no? Like, the old hacker ethos, so the POC or GTFO, like that whole thing. If I don't have a proof of concept that I can actually exploit it, it's theoretical. So if you come up with this thing and you say it's critical, but there's no known exploit in the public, and there's not a private group in the wild that is seen using it, do I even care about that thing? I probably don't. I probably will move on to something, because there's so much noise. We have customers that have as many as 7-digit numbers of open vulnerabilities at any point in time throughout their entire inside and out that they're tracking. So like they can't possibly chase all of that stuff, right? So yeah, we need to be able to do it. But then it comes like the question of like, okay, I've exploited it. Is it an isolated little island? If I pop it and it's an island, okay, well, it's an island, doesn't go anywhere. Okay, it's not worth anything. Versus I pop something and we land in the thing and it's interconnected to the inside network. It's got credentials, there's lateral movement and privilege escalation opportunities, etc. Maybe that's more valuable. Or this is where it gets complicated. Maybe that little island actually was the more valuable. Maybe the little island had all the data that you ever would need to go monetize and do something bad, right? Or maybe that's the breach scenario right there. So you really have to have the business context around the asset, and that's where we're trying to get to. Like this is our kind of our holy grail that we're chasing, if you will. Like we're trying to get to the point of getting that context with it so that it really makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of the toughest things that we attempt to do as an industry. And again, for me, maybe a little, just a pragmatic approach to it. I think so often it's easy to get stuck in kind of analysis paralysis and find the perfect scoring system and ensure continuity across the entire enterprise. But like my thing is like, you just got to start somewhere and start with the basics. And if you think of, the risk profile of, a marketing website versus a connected medical device that you have, very different risk profile. I mean, you're talking, marketing versus human lives at stake. And so I think just starting somewhere to better understand the risk that's attached to each asset and taking a step forward and, leveraging provider. It's often not just a technology, and there's got to be some kind of consultative approach to walk you through that and build the framework. In the cases where we see, humans kind of performing validation or tools only identifying, the risks in an environment, how do you see them coming together? I mean, why do we need both? I mean, specifically, what are the specific things that if you're just focused on tools or just focused on humans that you will miss in your approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we very much think this is where everything's starting to align, or like everything is going to be kind of congealed into one thing. If you're doing external pen tests today, you're probably spending 1 or 2 weeks doing it, right? So what are you doing the other 50 to 51 weeks of the year? Like what are you doing to watch? Are you just doing vulnerability scans? Well, that's great, but like we talked about before, your scope is probably defined in it. It's not looking for new things, so you don't have that. So that's why our approach, we are absolutely bundling in external pen test concepts and that with our attack surface management approach, because we want to do both. We want to be able to for one, customers probably don't have 2 buckets of money for this, right? Most customers are going to have 1 bucket of money. I have to do an external pen test for compliance to XYZ compliance regulation. And every year I'm going to spend this money for that thing. If you're now telling me I need to go do attack surface management on the side, I'm going to have to go buy this thing that's above and beyond that budget. Plus, wait, now I need FTEs to go triage and manage this. I don't have that. Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Versus, let's combine this thing. We'll do your attack service management. We'll deliver that external pen test report that you need for compliance. And then we'll basically stop treating this like some sort of a waterfall dinosaur. Like, if you think about it, that's really what this is. It's like the last little bastion of waterfall inside of cybersecurity. We're going to do this once a year, boom, boom, and we fall off the waterfall. And what do? We're in coast mode till next year's compliance regulation. Yeah. Instead, we look at this as agile. We're going to do it all. It's kind of like an onboarding. And then as we find new things, there's like little peaks and valleys throughout the rest of the year where we go find things, chase things that change, new things that pop up, etc. So it's just more continuous, and it's a better way to go. And overall, like, it's the natural progression of things.
Yeah. You've been on the front lines with one of the largest organizations in the world. I mean, what are some stories from the field as far as times where you maybe a risk was assessed and that risk that was flagged was very different in the environment than what was reality for that?
I mean,
for that part.
Yeah, this kind of alluding to one a second ago. So, like, imagine you've got some WordPress blog that's just sitting out there. It belongs to let's say you're a big multinational and you've got a little M&A sitting on the side someplace that's got some WordPress blog. That WordPress blog might be the most worthless thing on the planet. Like, if it gets popped, no one cares because 7 people are looking at it, right? Or it might be, holy crap, this thing's got, it could be a case where, oh yeah, I found the credentials for this thing. And it just so happens it's the CFO's, he reused the same password for his corporate access. And now I've got a potential means to come back into the mothership and go do things. Like, context really, really, really matters. And understanding risk is very, very difficult. You have to have all of that together to really kind of figure that out. When we used to land on a box, like, so when we were doing red team stuff, and I've talked to red teamers at pretty much every company, whether consulting or internal or whatever, it's all kind of goes the same way. And we know that real adversaries do the same thing. When you land, what you're now doing is you're now onboarding yourself. You're basically an undocumented admin inside that network. It is as if you were hired to do IT, but nobody in the company knows you're there, and everyone that used to do IT, you can't talk to, they're gone, right? Because that's basically what you got to do. So what do we used to do? We used to look for wikis, and we look for documentation, and like, it would be really great. We'd find that nice PCI document that shows your compliance, and here's your network map of where all the stuff is, and we trade it as this is the treasure map. We just got to go to this little section in the red box. We got to go figure out how to get there. And that's really, really common for across like any kind of average. Even we see real bad guys doing the same thing. The ransomware guys, they get on the network. What do? They onboard themselves. They read the documentation that's out there. They figure out who's got the credentials, and they start targeting those people to move up so they can take, king. They want to be king of the hill and take keys of the kingdom, right?
Yeah, it makes good sense. And as practitioners, maybe some common sense things like, what should we be looking for in our assessments to avoid that and just make informed decisions as we go down the path?
Well, the hardest part is you got to have really clear, concise findings. They have to make perfect sense. They have to have impact spelled out specifically, and they have to have repeatability, meaning, like, if I can't walk you through how you can do it yourself, then why would you ever believe that my finding is real? I've seen findings come from other providers in the past where I look at it and go, yeah, you faked that. I know for a fact that does not match my environment. That is not a real finding. You made this up to make it look cooler. I don't think, now I'm questioning whether this finding is real or not. And guess what? Now I'm going to have to go spend my time validating that this thing even exists. And maybe it doesn't even exist. Like, maybe you're just trying to pad a report and you thought you could get away with it. Maybe you're copying and pasting from another report from another company. I don't know. But it really goes back to that whole POC or GTFO concept from before. Show it to me. Prove it to me. Or I could just say, I'm from Missouri. This is Show Me State. You got to show me, right? This is real, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Makes good sense.
So, okay, so we've been talking about this ASM stuff, and if you're a customer and you're thinking about ASM, but you're doing penetration testing, and that's pretty much the extent of it, maybe some vuln scanning. Why do you think, Aaron, that's not sufficient? What do these customers need to be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I hit on this a little bit earlier, and I think it's important enough to mention a second time is if you've historically provided a scope to your provider, you're already kind of missing out on what you may not know. So I would be, one very focused on, kind of more of a black box approach, and that provider telling you what's there versus you telling them what to go watch. I think the collaboration with that provider and as the defenders, I mean, again, we've talked last time about this whole shift from offensive to proactive security in a partnering approach where the blue teams are working with the red teams or whatever color of the day we want to choose. And they're just collaborative and working to solve problems for the business. And then, I think the last one for me, of course, just to double down on the importance of the human element here. And I talk with so many CISOs that would say, look, like we are just overwhelmed with technology. There's some really good technology and we're overwhelmed with results. And our biggest challenge is hiring and retaining solid people to sift through those results. So give me actionable, meaningful data that I can move forward with. And that's really one of their biggest challenges. What do you think?
I mean, yes, those are all good. And I think we've hit on some of the other ones too, but like just to double down on it, if you're, the biggest thing for me is that adage of if you did a pen test, great. That was 1 or 2 weeks of the year. What are you going to do the other 50, 51 weeks of the year? Definitely that's something to consider with ASM. It's not just vulnerabilities. It's not just checking boxes. It's much bigger than that, to your point. Like it's the human element. It's the validation. Grouping these findings together is another big component that comes out of this, right? When you have a really large, especially the larger your attack surface, the more likely you're going to find the same category of things. Are you classifying them as one categorical thing to go approach as one like programmatic sweep behind to clean it all up at once, or are you swatting at little flies as they pop up because you're not able to group that together? That's another big deal. Point in time stuff, window in time stuff, obviously, like that's the whole point of doing continuous, so you don't miss any of that. And then going back to what we talked about a little bit ago, budgeting is one of the biggest hurdles to this. I think everybody and their brother would like to do a lot of stuff in their security program if money was no limitation, and having continuous attack surface management is definitely one of them. And having a third party that's really, really good at this side of this sort of thing, validating the form is also something they would really like to have. But the issue is like, am I using my external pen test money in the most effective way? Am I going in like, am I having to spend that money twice? Basically, I have to go through one third party and then also do an attack surface management approach through something else. So putting that all together, and then also thinking about the impact of your team. So if you do go buy an ASM solution of some sort and you got it, awesome. What is the net impact? Are you asking yourself what the net impact of that workload is? Because you're going to find new things. Right. I remember talking to somebody once upon a time saying, I don't want to start red teaming because if I start red teaming, then I'm going to start finding new things and my team's not ready. I got to get the basics and blocking and tackling out of the way. Same kind of concept applies here. When you spin up ASM, you're going to have new things you have to go chase. And in a world that's like we're over fatigued with alerts and things that are high and critical and everything else, you want to make sure that it is as lean and as high of signal and low of noise as possible to your team. And so your team can just still do the things that they have to do, right? So those are all things to consider, I think.
Yeah, no, makes perfect sense. Look, as we wrap up, and as professional podcasters, I feel like we have a responsibility to keep these to like 30 minutes. I think we'll get the most audience participation. But no, as we wrap up, I'm sure there's folks on the call today just thinking about, they like, what do I do in practice? So I'm struggling with the basics of, I know one that often comes up is like just validating the findings, validating all of the things coming to me, but then more importantly, like how do I remediate and how do I prioritize what's coming at me? So, just very simply, if I'm struggling with validation and prioritization of the things coming at me, what do I do next?
Well, just know, number one, you're not alone. If you're drowning in the noise, you're one of us. Right? Everyone's drowning in the noise, I think. Check in with your team, see how they're doing. Like if they feel like they're overwhelmed, whatever your approach is you need to adjust something. Make achievable goals, right? Like say, hey, we're only going to address criticals. I don't care about anything else. We're just going to do criticals. start with something, take some ground, make it your ground, own that ground, then expand. Just stay nice and simple, kind of a minimum viable product, MVP type of approach, I think would be a good way to go.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'm, probably pragmatic to a fault, but kind of like I said before, just like start somewhere,
Yeah.
one foot in front of the other, take the first step. And just thinking, proactively, again, kind of collaborating as a team, collaborating with your providers, and thinking about back to that early definition of proactive, continuous, always on. And over time, those results will start to mean more just by definition as you sift through them. I think that as you tackle the fundamentals, it gets easier over time. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I'll do a quick check in case there's any questions. But look, we're really looking forward to the next one. Again, feel free to join again, and we'd love to hear any questions that you may have, or hit us up after this online. We'd love to interact with you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.